Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick. You're at the Sustainable Business Podcast. And even though we're on Facebook Live, we're really recording a podcast episode for Ask Josh Patrick. And the podcast is called The Sustainable Business. And if anybody joins us while we're doing this, we don't take questions while the podcast is going on. But if you have questions, just type them in and we will answer them as soon as the podcast is over. So I want to introduce Hans Finzel, who is our guest for today. And my name is Josh Patrick, and I'm the host. I'm the founding principal here at Ask Josh Patrick, and we're going to start the podcast recording right now and get to it. So here we go. Hey, this is Josh Patrick, and you're at the Sustainable Business. And today our guest is Hans Finzel. Hans is a leadership expert, and he got into being a leadership expert because he was really unhappy with the leaders that he had to work under and knew there had to be a better way. He got so interested in leadership, he's even got a PhD in leadership. He's written 10 books, and his new book is Top 10 Ways to Be a Great Leader. So instead of me yammering on about what Hans is, we should really bring him in and let him talk for himself. So we'll do that. Hey, Hans, how are you?
I'm doing great, Josh. Good to see you. Nice to be on the show with you.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I think leadership is one of these really interesting topics, and I'm so glad that you contacted us to be on the show. So my first question for you, and this seems to be the ongoing argument in the leadership world, is, are leaders made or are they born?
Yeah, that is the question I get asked the most.
Yeah, well, it's a big one, I think.
Yeah, it is a big one, and it's my answer is always yes.
Okay, well, you have to go past the yes.
All right, so
you give us some more, please.
Well, there's no question. Some people are born with what I would call a wiring to be leaders, and people just naturally follow them. It's a charisma, it's a personality, it's a style. But I think in the long run, it's more important what you learn than what you're born known. I met some great people who didn't have any of that, and yet were extremely powerful leaders, because I define leadership with the word influence. I think about a Warren Buffett, one of the most influential men in America, but he's to me a gentle giant, and he's not the kind of guy that would sort of be the one that has all that personality to be a naturally born leader. So I think it's both. It's what you're born with. You know, I was born with that kind of leadership bent. And when I was a little kid, I was the leader in my neighborhood. And then I became a Boy Scout, and I was the leader of the troop. And it seems like I always fell into leadership naturally. But I think it's more important what you learn than what you're born with.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I've also, at least this is just my own style of leadership, is that I prefer not to be the name leader of a group. I have found that I can have more influence and be a better leader when I'm not the official leader.
That's so totally true. The positional leaders are not often the big leaders in an organization or a company. And that's why I say leadership is influence. And whoever influences the most people are the biggest leaders in that company or that group. And it's often not the appointed leaders.
Yeah, that's been my experience. I call that leading from the back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what Nelson Mandela was a big proponent of servant leadership. And he used the shepherd analogy, where you're behind the sheep and you're letting the strong ones go out front. That's great leadership.
Yeah, I love the idea of the concept of servant leadership. I also love the concept where you take your leadership or your organizational chart and turn it upside down.
Yep. Yep. I turned mine sideways. I didn't like the top-down chart, but I like the lead the charge. So if you imagine taking a chart and turning it sideways, yep. And I was the CEO of our company for 20 years, so I was out front leading. But the upside down, the problem with that is it can become what I call slave leadership, where you have to carry everybody on your back, and I'm not sure that's the best kind of leadership.
I think it's a terrible type of leadership.
Yeah.
I call that delegating up.
Yeah, there you go.
which is something you never would never want to participate in. So, tell me, why do you care so much about leadership?
I care so much about leadership because leaders make things happen. Yeah, everybody listening or watching today, you are affected by leaders, whether where you work, your community, of course, our country. And so leaders make things happen. And I care so much about leadership because I've seen a lot of bad leadership, and I've just had a passion to help leaders become better at their craft. That's kind of the space that I love. If I can help a leader realize some of their blind spots, some things they're doing wrong, help them improve, just the trickle down effect of how many people that affects. And many companies aren't successful because of their poor leadership. And if you can tweak that leadership and make it work better, the company will be more successful. So it's all about leaders. Leaders make things happen. And history is the story of leadership, good leaders and bad leaders.
So, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes people make when they're thinking about the world of leadership?
Well, first of all, they think they know how to be a leader if they get into leadership position. Just because you're in a leadership position doesn't mean you're a good leader. I think one mistake people make is, I like to say, if you do what comes naturally, you'll be a poor leader. Remember the old song, all you got to do is act naturally?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you just act naturally, we are naturally not going to be good leaders, I don't think, because naturally we're self-centered, selfish human beings, right? It's all about me, and it's about building up my portfolio and my career, and that's not good leadership. And servant leadership is the opposite. So the first mistake people make is to try to just, I got. They don't take any time to learn about leadership, to learn the craft. So those are some of the big mistakes they make right on the front end. Just because you're in a position of leadership doesn't mean you're a good leader.
I would agree with that 100%. So I'm a leader, or I want to be a leader. What are the things I need to be doing to make myself better at it? And this is especially true for owners of private businesses that employ less than 25 people. So if you employ less than 25 people, listen up.
That's right. And if you're successful, you're going to grow, and your leadership is going to be more and more important every month, the more you grow.
So I have less than 25 employees. I want to grow. I want to build a bigger business. What do I need to be learning to do?
We got to learn to change what you're doing with your time. That's the first thing, because when you started the company, you were probably small. Maybe it was just you, and then you started and you did all these things, whether it's selling a product or selling a service, you were doing all this frontline stuff. But as you grow, if you've got 25 people, you can no longer micromanage that frontline stuff and do that activity. You have to shift your activity to leading your team and building a team. Did you know one of the most important jobs of leadership is to develop other leaders? And I
remember at GE, you weren't eligible to be promoted until you trained your replacement.
There you go. I love that. See, a lot of small business owners can never take a vacation, and they have to be there all the time. And that shows me they're a control freak, and they haven't given up their child and let somebody else raise it, because it's their baby, and they want, and it's such a temptation to be a micromanaging control freak when you're building a small business. And that's the wrong play. You have to back up. You have to learn, like the H in leadership in my new book stands for hands-off delegation. You have to learn to be more hands-off and to focus on developing a team of people around you that can lead. If you can't go on vacation without the place falling apart or not making any money, you're really not a good leader.
I would say that's probably true. So in my experience, one of the biggest problems that smaller private business owners have is an issue with trust. And if you're going to be a great leader, can you talk about trust a little bit, please?
It's the number one reason that people don't delegate well, is they don't trust other people to do the work. I love the book. I don't know if you're familiar with Patrick Lencioni, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
One of my favorite business authors of all times.
Me too. And I was just on another podcast, and they were asking me for my favorite two most impactful books in the last 5 years, and that's one of them. The Five Dysfunctions of the Team. And that whole pyramid he builds is about trust.
Yes.
And people, when they don't trust each other, you don't have a team. You don't work together. You're not vulnerable. You're not working together as a team. So trust is everything in building a team, and also learning to delegate well. You've got to hire good people and learn to trust them.
Yeah, one of the 5 pillars of creating a sustainable business, or at least in my world, is to become operationally irrelevant in your company. And
I like that.
It's a really hard thing to do. And the 2 things I find that keep people from doing that, there's actually more than 2, but the main 2 is learning to trust their employees and have a tolerance for mistakes within their organization.
Absolutely. And that's where, I talk in my delegation chapter about why people don't delegate well. Did you know, I'm sure you know this, you're a smart guy. The more gifted you are, the more talented they are, the more you do things well in your space, the harder it is to delegate, because you can do things better than they. And delegation to me is another word for mentoring and developing other people. And that means you have to take the time, and you have to trust them, and you have to be willing for them to make mistakes and give them that margin again. But you don't want to be the micromanager. Dirty delegation is when you're looking over their shoulder every minute and telling them what to do.
See, that's not delegating. That's when you have a bunch of helpers working with you.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not developing anybody.
Yeah, most small business owners I know think they're delegating, but what they're really doing is they're creating a bunch of helpers to help them do the job.
Yeah, to help them do the job. Yeah.
Right. And around 25 employees, that doesn't work anymore.
Okay, so that's the critical spot where things have to shift.
Yeah, because I think that, once you get to 20, 25 employees, you no longer are supervising workers or supervising supervisors. You actually have to get work done through others. And if you can't learn to do that, you never grow. At least that's my experience.
I totally agree. That's right. When I left go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when I pride myself on the fact that I developed now our company was a lot bigger that I led. I mean, we had a $35 million budget annually when I left, and about 600 employees. But my team directly to me, I really worked hard at developing them. And when it was time for me to go, I had a guy that took my place. It was the board's decision, not mine, but he was my recommendation, and he'd been on my team. And it's a funny story, because I left and I thought, I ran the place for 20 years. I relocated us to Colorado, built a beautiful headquarters. And I just said, hey, Jeff, just call me whenever you need me. Guess how many times Jeff called me?
0.
That's right. He never calls. He never writes. I went into oblivion, and it kind of hurt my feelings. But then I realized none of us are irreplaceable. And actually, I guess I must have done a pretty good job, because he just took the thing off and ran with it, and they didn't need me anymore. And I at the end, I thought, yeah, I feel good about that. They're just doing fine, and they don't need Hans anymore. And that's what a leader should aspire to. Work yourself out of a job.
Well, the truth is, what you just described is what I call sellers or retirees' remorse. And what happens is you get off somebody's radar screen and the phone stops ringing. And it doesn't matter if you're a good leader or a bad leader or Attila the Hun. The truth is, once you get off the radar screen, the phone stops ringing. And people just don't ask for your advice. It's not because they don't want it, they don't like you. It's just you're off the radar screen. And that seems to be my sort of thing about that.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you on that. Absolutely.
It's not a good or bad thing. It just is and is, as far as I can see. So talk about listening for a little while.
Yeah, the L in leadership.
Yeah.
I use the acrostic of leadership in my new book, Top 10 Ways to Be a Great Leader. And the L, I always say, tell people, my audiences, hold up your finger like that. The L, is the two most important words in a leader's vocabulary is listen and learn. Nothing more important. And by the way, the last chapter of the book is the power of humility. I'm a huge fan of humility. Maybe we can talk a little bit about Jim Collins. He's my other go-to guy that I love for leadership. But a lot of business people think humility is weakness, but it's not. It's the opposite. There's a power in humility. If you're humble, you will listen and you will learn because you realize you're not the only smart person in the room. And success is all of us working together as a team. You know, we score when the team works together. And that's the kind of leader who will listen to the team. And when you get to that number of 25 employees, you probably know you should be involved in the front lines anymore of direct selling or whatever you're selling, whatever service you're providing. You're more now into management. They're the ones that are in touch with the customers, and that's why more important, you've got to listen to your team because they're in touch with the customers. So listen and learn. And I do think that you need to be committed to lifelong learning. Today, I think you'll stop being tomorrow.
So what happens if you're a business owner and you're not very curious about the world? Good listeners, in my experience, are just really curious people. And
that's right.
My method, I have the Socratic method of management, where I believe a good manager really just asks questions.
Yeah, that's good. That's like good coaching. That's the key to good coaching is asking good questions.
And my question is, okay, most people are not especially curious. Is that a fatal flaw in leadership?
To not be curious?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that is a fatal flaw because I think the world changes so dramatically that if you're not curious, you're not learning. And sometimes you might so dominate an industry that it doesn't matter because you hold this amazing patent that nobody else can take. But generally, I always think about companies like Kodak, that missed the digital photo revolution because they weren't paying attention.
They actually even had the camera. They just didn't want to sell it because they thought it was going to cannibalize their film sales.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting because I was in Rochester, New York after the whole company fell apart and all the 40,000 people lost their jobs. And I always thought it was a great, great illustration. Staying in touch, not listening, not learning.
So if
it's organizational arrogance, by the way. People can be arrogant. Can be arrogant. Companies can be, I know everything. I don't need to listen to anybody. I know my market.
Yes. So if somebody's not curious, what would you tell them to do?
How do you make somebody curious that's not curious?
Yeah. I mean, if leadership can be learned, then going from being not curious to being curious has to be possible.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how you can make somebody curious that's not naturally curious. Do you know? I don't.
Well, I think it's possible. It certainly happened with me when I was my own story. I started in my first business when I was 24 years old. And up until I was about 30, it was my way or the highway. I really wasn't interested in learning anybody else's opinion. And then my business almost fell apart 3 times on me. And I realized I had to change if I was to do that. And I've always been a voracious reader. So I just took that and I said, okay, what I'm doing is not working. So let me see if I can find something that is working. And I realized that being curious got me a lot further than being certain about what I thought was the right thing to do.
So you went on that journey on your own, though. It's not that I think it's hard for me to sit down with somebody that's not curious and say, you really need to be curious. I guess that's what I would try. Hey, and I love what you just said, because, hey, they're going to become curious. They need to if what they're doing is not working.
Yeah, you have to. If what you have isn't working, don't do it anymore.
Yeah, right. If you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got.
Yeah, well, the definition of insanity: do the same thing over and over and
Yeah.
expect a different result. That's
Yeah.
one of my favorite little wise. I have lots of wise guy sayings. That's just one of them.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
So let's talk about emotional intelligence for a second, just because I think that's a really interesting piece of good leadership.
Yeah, I love EQ, and I've thought about the people. I fired a lot of people in my career, and I had some high level people I fired. And when I look back, every one of the ones I had to fire, it was not because they weren't smart or because they weren't competent in their area of responsibility. It was because they had terrible EQ, emotional intelligence. I remember a woman I had to fire who was so gifted in women in leadership, and she was on my top team, and she was so smart and so gifted, but people would come to me and say, Hans, I feel like I have to walk on eggshells around her. I never know when she's going to explode. And she would explode and get angry and explode on people in the hallway in front of other people, creating situations. We tried to help prevent. So that's a great example. She was smart, but she lacked EQ.
Yeah, I call people like that the brilliant jerk.
The brilliant jerk, yeah. And there's a lot of brilliant.
There are a lot of brilliant jerks, and you can't let them in your company.
No, you can't. And so when you interview people for your company, you've learned this, I'm sure. When I'm talking to references, sadly, today references won't even talk to you anymore because of legal climate. But, I ask people, tell me how they get along with people. Tell me about their people skills.
Yeah.
Tell pressure. That's emotional intelligence. My assistant and I always used to say, we hire for attitude and we train for skill.
Yeah, I absolutely.
That's all about emotional.
If you go into Jim Collins, right person, right seat, that really fits in there. And if I have my choice between the two, I want right person before I go right seat, because I can usually train for right seat.
Absolutely. So that's to me, it's like, and above the waterline is IQ, and below the waterline is a lot bigger, and that's EQ. And I think about what sunk the Titanic was under the waterline. The intelligence is what sinks many a person. So yeah, I don't want those people in my organization.
Yeah, I don't either. Hey, Hans, we are unfortunately out of time for this podcast episode. And tell us a little bit about your book and where they can find it, and where they can find you.
Well, they can find me at my website, hansfinzel.com, HANSFINZEL, hansfinzel.com. And you can just Amazon or wherever you buy books, and you'll find my books there. Top 10 ways to be a great leader.
Cool. Thanks so much, Hans. I really appreciate having you on today. And I have an offer for you also. I have a 1-hour free audio CD course. It's called Success to Sustainability, the 5 things that you need to be doing in your business to create a personally and economically sustainable business. It's really easy to get it. Just take out your smartphone. And if you're driving, wait till you stop driving. Take out your smartphone and text the word sustainable to 44222. That's the word sustainable to 44222. And this is Josh Patrick. You're at The Sustainable Business. I hope to see you back here really soon. Thanks for stopping by. And Chris, we're out, and let's continue talking a bit, Hans, if you have some time to spend.
Sure, I got time.
So let's go through the other things on your list here. I'm looking at A is for accessibility.
Yeah. The old days, the old paradigm was the executives hang out in the corner office or on the executive floor. In fact, I tell the story in that chapter about a company down in Houston. Heard about another company just like this. It's the old paradigm. The floor of this big building is the executive floor. And nobody's allowed executives. They have their own gym, they have their own cafeteria, and they isolate and insulate themselves and the worker ants. That's the old paradigm. A lot of thinking about and studying about millennials, and I'll tell you, millennials who are storming into the workplace won't put up with that. They demand accessibility and vulnerability. So my message is, worker needs to be casual and work shoulder to shoulder with the people. Don't isolate and insulate yourself from the people. Actually, that goes back to, you're not going to listen and learn if you're never around them.
So let's talk about integrity for a second.
Okay.
I'm jumping around on you, by the way.
Yeah. Integrity, back to Warren Buffett. He I don't have that quote in front of me that's in that chapter, but when he hires people, is if they don't have integrity, then nothing else they have interest. Integrity is John Maxwell, who I've known through the years. I assume you know the name John Maxwell. Everybody knows him, and I wrote him. When I was doing that chapter, I wrote some people for their definition of integrity and finishing well. And said, when the people closest to you respect you the most, then you've got integrity. And I thought, well, that's a twist, because sometimes the people are not on the inside to be on the outside. They're pretenders. Integrity is you're the real deal. You're honest. You have ethics. You don't cheat. You don't steal. You don't lie. Do the right thing. And it's a real important.
Cool. How about resilience? Because I think that's a big deal.
Resilience is flexibility. It's like being bending in the wind. We're just in the middle of hurricane season here in the stating, and a dead tree will just snap. A dry tree will just break. A dry leader, when the winds come, will snap and break and fail. But if you're living and you're resilient, you will flex with those winds of failure, of disappointment, of opposition. So say that Slinky, remember the Slinky toy? Everybody is very flexible. One of the great keys to leadership success is you got to be flexible, because things won't turn out the way you want for you to. Your company will not be what you thought it was. But if you're resilient and flexible, it means I get up when I'm knocked down. I keep going.
So to me, resilience means asking the question when I make a mistake, what did I learn? If one of the things that I always like is that, and this is a Buckminster Fuller quote, he used to say, you don't learn less. And mistakes are learning opportunities. And both of those statements I truly love. And if you can do that, you automatically become pretty resilient, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, it's kind of back to your insanity quote. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, you're not analyzing your failure. You're not asking the right questions. And resilience is, again, being flexible when you fail and analyzing, why did I fail? And let's see if I can avoid failing again, tripping over that same branch again.
Yeah. So are you familiar with the School of Management called Appreciative Inquiry, Hans?
No, I'm not.
Appreciative Inquiry essentially says, instead of focusing on what you need to fix, focus on what's working and magnify that. And that sort of fits in with resilience, I think, is that too often when you focus on things that aren't working, you get yourself all the way up to mediocre.
Yeah.
If you focus on what you do well, you can become world class.
Yeah.
It sort of fits in with the I don't know if you're aware of the Gallup surveys. Now discover your strengths.
I'm very familiar with that. Yes.
And one of my favorite questions to ask when I do seminars is it more important to magnify your strengths or fix your weaknesses?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have a very I mean, the answers almost go 100% this way. Business owners all want to magnify their strengths, and employees all want to fix their weaknesses.
That's interesting. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
really,
and
yeah.
I've had a couple of business owners say, no, I got to fix my weaknesses. But that's out of well over a couple of hundred I've asked this question to.
Yeah.
So,
I'm also a big fan of Strengths Finders, which is
yes.
same idea. Focus on what you're good at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's where that comes from. That question comes from Strength Finders. And once you know what you're good at, focus on that and manage the stuff you're not good at.
Exactly. And staff to your weaknesses.
Yes.
Like,
one of the things I loved about having 90 employees, I didn't have to do anything I wasn't good at.
Yeah.
When you're under 10, you got to do a lot of stuff you're not very good at. But once you get over 10, 15 employees, there is no reason for you to ever again do anything that you're not really good at. But you have to hire people who are going to drive you crazy.
Yes. Oh boy, that's so true.
because those people who are doing things well that you don't do well have a completely different way of living in the world and operating in the world. And they're really important.
Yeah, and that gets to things like the DISC test. I'm sure you're familiar with the DISC test, which I also used a lot. And I love those. And I remember a guy that was one of my top leaders that we did not have good chemistry, and we could not be more different in our wiring and our DISC. And, I'm a high D and he was a high.
I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, he was a high C, and the guy drove me nuts. But
right.
I knew how valuable he was because I don't care about details, and all he cared about was details. Right. But I needed him, and he saved our bacon many times because of his careful attention to detail. But he would drive me crazy.
Yeah, well, he wants to slow you down, and you want to go faster.
Exactly.
And frankly, it's a good thing for us high Ds to get slowed down a lot because
he used to call me. He would call me a hubcap chaser. He said, "You're always chasing the next shiny thing," and it's kind of true,
Right? Yeah, I say, "Oh, squirrel."
Yeah, I know, but I'm not. My wife is a butterfly. I mean, I'm an INTJ. I can be very focused, but I do lose interest in the mechanics and the details.
Right. That makes a lot of sense to me. Hey, Hans, this has been really fun today. Really enjoyed our conversation. And
me too.
And I wish you the best with your book, even though it's your 10th book. You've down this road lots of times.
Thank you.
I'm just finishing up my first book. So
good for you. When's it going to come out?
I hope late fall.
Okay, well, the launching of a book it's all about the launch. I mean, to me, I think writing the book is almost the easiest part.
I agree with that. I actually write pretty easily, so
I do too.
I have to sweat every word. I can write 1,000 words in almost anything in about 20 minutes, and it's not very hard for me to do that. The hard thing is to then take it and get it out in the world so people would actually do something with it.
That's the challenge. So. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And
it's great to meet you.
It's great meeting you. And thanks a lot for those who are watching. And I'm going to bet you got lots of good information on this episode. Come back and see us again.